Yes, thank you. I'm doing fine.
Good.
Though I just had a situation with the 800 number.
We've all been there. So anyway, I know it's already a little bit after 12, and a small but mighty group that we'll have. We have others who tune in afterwards. This week's Torah portion is Korach, and wanted to focus on the very beginning of it, chapter 16. And I also wanted to bring in some wonderful commentary by Nechama Leibowitz, and then make some comparisons to what we have in our in the Haftarah. So just the first 15 verses of chapter 16. It's a well-known story of Korach and Datan and Aviram, their revolts against Moses and Aaron. So I thought it would be a worthwhile discussion. And later on, I'll set us up for what we're going to have on Thursday for Lunch and Learn. It will be on free speech and the limits of it, the challenges of it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, so as we're about to engage with Torah, we say the bracha Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, creator of the universe. You've sanctified us with mitzvot, and you've instructed us to engage with words of Torah. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our screen share. And I've got things up there. Good. I'll make it a little bit larger. How's that? That'll work. Let's read just these first 15 verses of chapter 16, and then we'll go from there. Can I get a volunteer?
I can read if you want.
Thank you, sir.
Now Korah, son of Issachar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, betook himself along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and Adonai is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above Adonai's congregation?" When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Then he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Come, morning, Adonai will make it known who is his, and who is holy, and who will grant him access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. Do this, you, Korah, and all your band, take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before Adonai. Then the man whom Adonai chooses, he shall be the Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi." Moses said further to Korah, "Hear me, sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him to perform the duties of Adonai's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them? Now that God has advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you, you seek the priesthood too. Truly it is against Adonai that you and all your company have banded together. For who is Aaron, and you should rail against him?" Moses said for Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come. Is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us? Even if you have brought us to the land flowing with milk and honey, given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out these men's eyes? We will not come." Moses was most aggrieved, and he said to Adonai, "Pay no regard to their oblation. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any one of them."
All right. Thank you. Hi, Kathy. Good to see you. So we've read through this, obviously, as we go each year through all of it, we've read it. But that is a particularly famous portion in which Moses is facing down a challenge. Now, again, put it into context. We just had last week in Shalach the representatives from each of the tribes who went to Israel to scout it out, viaturoto, and they came back, and they all said it's a wonderful land flowing with milk and honey, but 10 of the representatives said, Ephes, it doesn't do us any good. It's nothing because we're not capable of conquering it. We're not worthy of it. We don't believe that God has given us the strength to take possession of it. Only Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can. But as a result of this faithlessness, and of the subsequent revolts, because many of the people started to murmur against Moses and Aaron. And they said, what did you do? You brought us here to a land where the giants will devour us, the land will devour us, and we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And so it was a real revolt. And it's not the first one either. You know, don't forget what happened with the golden calf was very much a revolt. And we had other grumblings as well, sometimes for good reason, because they couldn't find enough water, or there was a food shortage. So the strains of leadership are quite evident, and also the strains of the community on the community are evident as well. So we've had now these confrontations. What happened after, and we had this last week's portion, after the disaster with the scouts, is that there were many who lost their life. I think it was 14,000. We'll see that in about a second in one of the commentaries. And now there are people who are coming to Moses and Aaron saying, who the heck named you the boss of everyone? Now, Moses, you're a prophet, fair enough. But is that enough for you to name Aaron as the high priest, the Kohen Gadol? Are not all the people holy? And challenging his selection of not only his brother as high priest. And this is problematic, as you can imagine, if you have someone who is the political leader, then naming his own brother as the spiritual leader. There's some problem there. You find people questioning whether or not there's a lot of nepotism involved in the governance. Can you think of any examples that we've had in American history where that's the case?
Bushes.
Who?
Bushes.
Well, we have the Bushes most recently, absolutely. Who else?
How about Trump? I mean,
well, okay, Trump had in his inner circle, he named Jared Kushner and
Jared was
right.
God, he was going to solve the Middle East. I was impressed.
Well, okay, so that was certainly some nepotism. Did we have any with the Clintons?
Well, she was the Secretary of State, but after the term was up.
Well, a little bit. So a little bit of, so are the Clintons, are the Bushes, are now we have the Kennedys. Now we can look at the Kennedys. What did John Kennedy do when he became president?
Bobby
Pointed his brother.
Right. How'd that go over?
Not well for him.
Well, I know, but it's people started saying, "Why you can't just have it make it totally a family affair?" Now that's not fair either, because what if there's the most talented person? Certainly, no one would sniff at the credentials of Bobby Kennedy, and yet you start opening eyes a little bit when people see that you're naming your brother or your loved ones in positions of power. So we have experienced that in this country, and we know that it goes back and forth a little bit with it. So here we have the chieftains, and we're going to look at some of the commentary with it. The chieftains are really having a hard time with Moses appointing Aaron as the high priest, and also their own exclusion. That hey, many of us are the firstborn too. So we're going to look at some more of the commentary. Anyone else has something they wanted to add? Arnie.
Yeah, there's a much broader implication. It's a wonderful lesson because human nature. I mean, if you look back, first of all, the legitimacy, who's supposed to appoint these people? And then how do you legitimize your own leadership? I mean, think about it, historically, you either do it through power, your sword, you do it through wealth, you do it through ordination. God told me. And the real test of the division of church and state was this country, as far as that went. But if you look at, say, the Arab world, the Sunnis and the Shiites, they hate each other for the fact that one said it had to come from Muhammad, the other one said no. The people will make the choice. That's the Sunnis and the Shiites. So it's interesting because this is probably the first introduction of what is human nature repeated over the generations.
Right. Which was why I think these 12 sessions are so important for us. The Torah is absolutely inspired in the way it holds up a mirror to the human character, both the good and the not so nice, right? That's good. Lori wanted to say hello. Good to see you again too.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, let's go back to yes, sir. I'm Arnie. Alan, please.
I think the whole bunch needs a class in anger management.
There's a lot of, you're right, exactly. But you find that. I mean, there are times, I think anger is a reaction that comes out more often during times of stress. And let's face it, if you're in the wilderness for a long time and you were just told that you're going to be in the wilderness for a lot longer, then people start to lose control of their patience. So let's get back to our text here. I wanted to bring in, I'm going to show you this here. I'm going to unshare this for just a second. I wanted to show you, this is one of the volumes of Nechama Leibowitz. And this is, you can tell it's quite old. Nechama Leibowitz was just an amazing teacher, which I've had the pleasure of being with. She passed away in 1997, born in the early 1900s, 1905, I believe, in Latvia. Moved to Israel, set up shop in Jerusalem, and became truly one of the great Torah commentators. And at the time, it was not that common for a woman scholar to be given that kind of credibility, but she earned it, and her work specifically was with the World Zionist Organization, Department of Torah and Education. They published her works, just fabulous. We do have some copies of this in our Temple Sinai library, and I believe it's still being published so that you can get copies. So just to bring her back, because we always make reference to Rashi and Rambam and Sephorno, etc., guys who lived not quite 1,000 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, but Nechama Leibowitz was very much a contemporary, and I wanted to turn you on to some of the things that she had to share. So we get back to that text. The first thing she mentions is the passage from Pirkei Avot. Now, during the summer, we read Pirkei Avot, and this is what it says. Can I have someone who's willing to read a little bit from this passage from the Mishnah? Please.
No, you can go ahead and read. I like your voice better.
Okay. You have a nice voice too, Alan. Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure, which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven. Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korah and all his congregation.
Good. So as we read that, now we know the story. What's going to happen is Moses has this test. The earth opens up and swallows Korach and Datan, Abiram, and all their family and all the loved ones. And it was another great loss of life. So like every civil war and civil strife, there's some terrible consequences. And so the rabbis had to struggle with this. Wait a minute, wasn't this just a dispute of leadership? Isn't that legitimate? And at one point now, do we have a say where one is deserving of punishment and one is celebrated. I mean, we celebrate the disputes between Hillel and Shammai. We use that as an example of, look, Elo ve'elo divrei Elohim chayim, that this one and that one, they both spoke the words that would be reflective of God's will. It's just that we have to choose one or the other. We just are choosing more with Hillel. So how could it be that that Shammai speaks something that reflects the divine will, and yet he's rejected? Because humans can only accept certain things, and we have to make certain decisions. God's truth expands beyond our comprehension, and therefore, even those who are of the minority opinion, even those who are on the losing side of a dispute, nevertheless bring some truths that are significant. We might even say, as they say, Elo ve'elo divrei Elohim, that they are also reflective of God's word. Even the ones who are in the dispute that lose the dispute, nevertheless, their words can be reflective of being sacred, not just significant. So that's a huge thing. So what's the difference between these disputes of for the sake of heaven and those in which there's a punishment? The earth opens up and swallows them, right? That was a huge thing. The political situation that we're in currently seems to be one in which everyone wants the earth to swallow up the next person. we're not having too many willingness to compromise. So I don't know. I want to get to this passage from Bartanura, but before I do, I wanted to see if you had any comments about that.
The analogy is different. I mean, this is legitimization of leadership. I said, right now, I mean, look where it came from. Pharaoh was like God. Okay, I mean, but how many generations did it take to get to that point? Even the Israelites ultimately created a king that had to be anointed. That was his legitimacy. Some guy wandering around who was dusty, who was deemed a prophet. So legitimizing leadership, think about the ages that went through in Europe, kings, and passing it on from one to the other. It took revolution up here to uproot. Democracy in this country is still an experiment, and that's what we're facing now. The people are supposed to legitimize it, and we'll see.
Right. And the challenge to a legitimate election that cuts to the very core of our leadership, of our society. It's one thing to say, I'm really disappointed that I lost. It's another thing to say, I didn't lose. There was a scam, and all of a sudden the legitimacy of the entire system is challenged. That's dangerous. That's very dangerous. And Korach and Datan and Abiram, they're playing with that kind of danger. And the question is, did they do so for the sake of truth, for the sake of the community, for the sake of virtue? Because you could have a legitimate challenge to the rise in power of a dictator, of a tyrant. And you can say, you know what, we will not stand for this. And that there was a rigged election, and there has been. But that's a crossing of the Rubicon kind of statement. You are throwing down the gauntlet that will ultimately challenge the entire system, and we're going through a little bit of that right now. So interesting, and we'll get to this towards the end, because Arnie, you said quite smartly that how do you elect a king? We're going to get in the Haftarah, in the first book of Samuel, how Samuel the prophet is also having people come to him saying, hey, Samuel, we don't want prophets anymore. We want a king. And he gets upset. And so our ancestors saw, just as you did, tying together the election of leaders and the legitimacy of leaders. So thank you for bringing that up. So here we go. Here's Ovadia Bartanura, whose commentaries are essential for the Mishnah, but also he has some wonderful commentary on the Torah as well. Lori, would you continue on with Ovadia Bartanura?
Sure. I don't remember ever learning about this
Passage?
first person before. Commentator.
Oh, yeah, well,
Italy and Jerusalem.
His commentary are more on Mishnah. And so I brought his commentary because he's going to talk a little bit about the Pirkei Avot, about this passage which we just read. He's terrific. And especially for those of us who were reading Mishnah in our early student years, his Hebrew is wonderful and easily comprehensible. So he was always one of our favorites.
Plus his name is kind of fun to say.
Yeah, it is. They have a pretty decent wine after him.
Oh.
Yeah. Alan, yes, sir.
Yes. Senior moment. I've taken many classes with Rabbi, boy, I shouldn't talk, I can't remember. The rabbi who had that terrible stroke, Rabbi
The woman.
Cohen, Rabbi Cohen, Sandy Cohen.
Yeah.
And I had several with Ali and Pirkei Avot. We would have some conversations that were real educational. She's like the rabbi here. She's a good person.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, she is, and she's spoken at Temple Sinai a number of times. Okay, so Lori, would you share with us, Prabhadia?
Sure. Every argument that is for the sake of heaven's name, it is destined, literally, its end is to endure. That is to say that the parties to the argument are destined to endure and not perish, as with the argument between Hillel and Shammai. Neither the students of the school of Hillel nor the students of the school of Shammai perished, but Korach and his congregation perished. Excuse me. And I heard the explanation of its end is its purpose that is sought from its subject. And with the argument which is for the sake of heaven, the purpose and aim that is sought from that argument is to arrive at the truth. And this endures, like that which they said, from a dispute the truth will be clarified. And as it became elucidated from the argument between Hillel and Shammai, that the law was like the school of Hillel.
Right.
And with argument which is not for the sake of heaven, its desired purpose is to achieve power, love of contention, and its end will not endure, as we see in the argument of let's see.
Of Korach, right there.
Korach and his congregation, that their aim and ultimate intent was to achieve honor and power, and the opposite was achieved.
Right. So it's the motivation and their agenda. Was it self-serving or was it noble? And this statement, which I bolded here, from a dispute of the truth, will be clear. For a dispute, if you had two people who are combating with one another, the truth will become clarified. If it's only one side that you're hearing, you're getting less of the truth. If you get two sides that have noble ideals and agenda that's not selfish, but rather is concerned with the welfare of the community, then the truth will be victorious. We'll have benefit from it. But there are others who will obfuscate. They will play on our baser motivations, on our prejudices, on our fears, and they'll whip up a mob to do things that are detrimental to the welfare of the community. And we've experienced that in our day, and we've certainly seen it throughout history. And Bartanora was making note of that. So I wanted to bring into focus the words by Nechama Leibowitz. And she wants to get right into some of the psychology of Korach and Datan and Abiram. What is it exactly that they are, that is causing them, what is it exactly that Korach and Datan and Abiram are doing that would cause us to doubt their sincerity, that they were not disputing on behalf of the welfare of the community? They weren't just challenging a brother being named high priest as an example of nepotism. Rather, they were doing it for selfish reasons, for power hungry reasons. And this is Nechama Leibowitz focuses on that which we had read just above, and I bolded it here especially in verse 3. They combined, or they joined forces against Moses and Aaron, and they said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and Adonai is in their midst. Why do you raise yourself above Adonai's congregation? Ki chol ha'edat kulam kedushim uftocham Adonai umadua titnasu." Literally, make yourselves a prince al kahal Adonai. And so, read just on a first glance level, you'd think, well, wait a minute, what they are bringing up, Korach, Datan, and Abiram, this seems perfectly legitimate. All the people are holy. That's something we can buy in. There's sacredness in every person. We can buy that. So how can we say that Korach and Datan and Abiram are being selfish? This seems to us, on first reading, that they're being quite generous and open and universal, right? And so Nechama Leibowitz uses her microscope to get a little bit closer into their words. And so this is what she had to say. Kathy, do you want to read Nechama Leibowitz's words?
Note that they do not say all the congregation is holy as unit, but all the congregation are holy, every one of them, each one taken individually. The assertion of individual selfish ambitions outweighs their group feeling, kingdom of priests and holy nation. They interpreted the mission of holiness, the role of chosen people with which they had been charged by God, in the sense of conferring on them superiority and privilege, rather than as constituting a call to shoulder extra duties and responsibilities. God demanded of them, "Ye shall be holy," that is to say, show yourselves holy by your deeds. For thou art
A holy, I'm sorry. I typed
a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord has chosen them to be a special people unto himself.
Continues on down here.
The titles of special people, holy people, were in the nature of demand notes presented by the Almighty for them to honor by deeds of holiness. Instead, they took them to be titles of distinction, conferring privileges on them. Instead, they clamored for rights. They presented the Almighty with a demand note, as it were. This is a far cry from the divine call to Israel, "Ye shall be holy to me," charging Israel with a spiritual mission to perfect herself by carrying out the divine commandments. Instead, we are faced by the brazen assertion, "The whole congregation are holy, every one of them." So unsupported by realities as we know it only too well from the previous Sidrot.
Right. So, sorry about that. Whoops. That the Sidra, of course, the previous Torah portions in which we had the people not acting nobly, certainly not acting holy. And so let's Parsha, thank you. What was Nechama Leibowitz saying that how did she understand that Korach was for selfishness? Because of that, the whole congregation are holy as opposed to is holy. She took that on as an indication of individualism versus collective responsibility. So how do you react with that? How do you parse that?
I like it because I think that's also what makes Jews different from other things. You know, we're not declared, you know, with a little magic wand, ding, you're holy. We have to earn it. And one bad apple doesn't spoil the barrel. You know, it's just up to the barrel to kick that apple out, you know, and get a better apple. You know, it's individual. It's up to us. It's a responsibility.
Right.
And we just don't come by it from, who's your daddy or ordination from God or somehow. Yeah. And I want to ask you, where'd you get that T-shirt and how do I get one?
Oh, really? I don't know. It's Susan's.
Okay, I'll
You
ask.
like it, Nicole? We'll look it up.
I think it'd be cool because of the trip coming
It's
up.
goisrael.com. But it's like much of the stuff that we have in our house, it's an oldie but a goodie. So who else would like to comment on this? Again, the individual is holy. Yes, of course. But that doesn't mean that person has special privileges. Rather, remember, she uses that God has given each person and us collectively a charge. You have to hold a higher standard. And so the specialness is not of extra privilege, but rather of extra responsibilities. And that's a very important distinction that the Nechama Leibowitz picked up on. And certainly she thinks that that's at the core of the dispute between Moses and Korach. Korach wanted to wear the mantle of leadership simply for the glory and not for the actual job. Mark, please.
Are there other places that carry that same philosophy that we could learn from? Because I don't recall anything exactly like this being in the Torah.
Oh, I find it throughout. We do have all of Israel is responsible for one another, and being we've said when we refer to Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim, that we are chosen from all the people. That is not a title of privileges, but rather of a mindset that we take seriously, that this life has meaning, this life has purpose, and that each human being, regardless of their faith, regardless of their race, regardless of their nation, each human being is of God. And it's not a hierarchy of this human's better than that human, which is one of the reasons why, again, in this week's Torah portion, I'm not going to focus on it. Later on, no doubt the editors of the Torah put this together with a purpose in mind. Later on, there's the legitimacy of the ascension of Aaron and his sons as the high priests, and they will be the Kohanim, i.e. the ultimate high priest, and the Levites will be somewhat lower in category. And that's what we have to this day. The Kohanim are those who are descendants of Aaron, and so you will see someone have at the end of their name HaKohen, right? Is anyone here a Kohen? I thought Michael's is it Michael Kohen? Kathy? Maybe. Anyway, Arnie, are you a Kohen?
Yes.
Okay, so you have HaKohen at the end of your name. If others who are not of the tribe, which is a Kohanim is also a Levite, but a Levite is not necessarily a Kohen. So if you are a Levite and not a Kohen, instead of HaKohen, you would have HaLevi. And when you are calling someone up in an Orthodox shul and in the vast majority of conservative shuls, they'll call up the Kohen first, the Levi second, and the person from Israel third. So there is a hierarchy, and there are certain privileges that we give to the Kohanim. And if that was the case, that Korach was saying, "No, that's not fair." Well, I think we would put our our support behind him, because in the Reform movement we did say, you know what, this whole distinction between Kohanim and Levites and regular Jews is just not right. It's not appropriate anymore. We haven't had a temple, for goodness sakes, for almost 2,000 years. And why make these distinctions? So Nechama Leibowitz went beyond that. She said it wasn't about that, although that could have been legitimate. It was about simply he wanted to wear the mantle of leadership and the glory of the position. Anyone else?
How do you get through this without thinking of Edward G. Robinson? He had that role.
Oh, right.
I don't think we should ever not think of Edward G. Robinson. He was awesome. He was another one who stood up on Madison at the Madison Square Garden, telling the world about the Nazis well before anyone else wanted to admit it. He was a brave and proud man. There was something there.
He went to my college, City College in New York, many classes before me.
He was terrific. Okay, so let's get back to our text.
It also kind of makes you think of Mel Brooks. It's great to be the king.
Well, right. But see, Mel made a joke of it, but we know that. And we have sayings within our culture, the king's not wearing clothes, etc. We can see the humanness, the nakedness, the vulnerability of the king. He's just a human, right? Bob Dylan saying, even the president of the United States must sometimes stand naked. We know that, right? But unfortunately, this mad chase after the leadership becomes one of great ego and hubris, as opposed to one of a desire to serve. Now, can I just real quick? One, and I'm not gonna. I hope I don't put to it. I pray that we'll have the Knesset vote in Lapid and Bennett and their coalition to be the new prime ministers. Now, Lapid comes from the party that has the largest number of members of Knesset, and yet he reached out to Bennett, with whom he disagrees greatly on so many issues, but he said, "You can be prime minister first," right? Now you'd think the guy who has the most would say, "I'm first, you're second," but he said, "No. What we're after right now is to try to get different voices, and we may not all agree with each other, but we have to get our nation to break through that cycle of partisanship." And I thought, and I hope, I pray that that's legitimate. I hope, that this is an example of someone being really selfless. And I put Bennett and Lapid in that. And I disagree vehemently with Bennett on a lot of issues. But this seems to be a hope that, gosh, there's some better characters out there. Okay, Arnie.
I'm just interested in the opinion of people here. Is democracy sustainable? I mean, if you look historically, the Greeks fell apart. Israel hasn't exactly working like an oiled machine. And for the first time here in this country, democracy is falling apart. Right. So you kind of wonder, is this kind of from the Torah describing, hey guys, don't take anything for granted. You've got to decide legitimacy for leadership. And, the easiest one is one I can't argue with you about. You can prove to me that God said so, that ends the argument.
Right.
So, it's kind of, I'm kind of very concerned with what's going on in this country and what's going on in Israel.
Yeah. Well, go back to what Winston Churchill said. He said, democracy is terribly inefficient. It's a really difficult, messy, unfortunate system. And yet it's by far the best we got.
It's all we got. Yeah.
So, I mean, we know what happened was with with tyrants and emperors and kings. The abuse has gone throughout history. Fortunately, now this messy democratic experiment, with all of its problems, we're not doing so bad. Alan.
Yes, it's likened to a army man in war who jumps on 2-3 people or one person to save their life. It's that's commendable.
Yeah. Well, I think democracy, the reason why it's so bumpy, to me, my opinion, why it's so bumpy right now, is that most of us weren't paying attention or close enough attention. And democracy requires work, constant vigilance and work. We got to pay more attention. and yeah, and get off our butts and do something. My
Very good.
opinion.
No, very good.
Well, I totally agree with you, Kathy. Clearly, the route we're on. I mean, this is the United States is the largest extant democracy that's ever existed, and it's falling apart. So the question is, what are we going to do different to sustain democracy? Otherwise, we're just right. All we need is a crisis now in the United States, and we will have an authoritarian figure to eliminate the chaos, and 90% of this country will vote for it, just like they did in Germany.
Right.
So, you know, it's a very fragile time. I totally agree with Kathy. I hope somebody's working on what can we do differently.
Yeah, we're in the midst of it, and I like, Kathy, your thought that we all have to become a little bit more attentive, a lot more attentive is true. Let's get back to our text. Rabbeinu Bachya said this whole thing about the disputes with Korach, that kulam kedushim, all of them, they are all holy. This is what his take was on it was. Kathy, go ahead. Would you finish that piece?
My hand's a little jiggly.
Yeah.
I got to get off a few more drugs before I'm really up for all this. Rabbi Behia ben Asher ibn Halawa, Spain, they are all holy. Korach referred to the firstborn Israelites as holy, seeing the Torah had written in Exodus 13:2, sanctify for me every firstborn. And why do you try to elevate yourselves? He meant Moses and Aaron, respectively, claiming the position of king and high priest.
Right. So Rabbeinu Bachya says, you know what, Korach was not referring to that every single member of Israel was holy, but rather the firstborn. Because as he said earlier, we're told, sanctify for me the firstborn. So I'm not the firstborn. I would not be holy. And so Bachya questions his the very premise that Korach had any interest in seeing the holiness in others. He just wanted to have for himself. Now this is from the Midrash Tanchuma, and its take on this story I thought was quite interesting also. Can I get someone to share this?
Oh, Rabbi,
Yes, ma'am.
excuse me. I was just thinking, there have been stories lately on the news about the elections in Mexico and how so many of the people that run for office are murdered. And just contrasting the people who are brave enough to run for office there, you know, under threat of losing their lives, compared to people running for office in Israel and the US. I mean, there must be a different motivation.
Right.
I think hand in hand with wanting to be a leader in the US, for example, you know, you have to have a big ego. You have to want it for selfish reasons, as well as wanting to lead. To improve things, but in a society like in Mexico, maybe there isn't so much of the selfish motivation. I don't know.
Well, you find heroes everywhere. I mean, look at the brave men and women who are standing up against Putin in Russia.
Yeah, right.
Of course, they are, if not killed, then they're jailed or robbed of any opportunities. He's ruthless. I mean, we do have that in various countries, and we can point throughout. But here's something where I want to share, because I do have the privilege of connecting with the men and women who serve our country in Washington with some frequency, as well as here locally, both on the state level and the city level. They are decent people. I mean, you need an ego to put yourself out in front. You know, you need an ego, for goodness sakes, to be a rabbi, to stand up in front of on a bima and to do the things. You know, it's not a question of ego. It's a matter of, do you use this and see this as a vehicle by which you can make a positive difference? And I can say that the vast majority of the men and women I've met, Democratic from the Democrat Party as well as the Republican Party, they are good people. They work their tails off, and you're not getting rich being a mayor of a city or in Congress or even a senator, for that matter, a president. The people in the private industry make far more than they do serving this country. And there's a lot, to put your name out and an opinion out and immediately to be attacked, and editorials and people marching in front of your house and carrying signs saying terrible things, and social media just raking you over the coals. I mean, they put up with a lot of gruff, which is unfortunate, but it's true. And still these men and women, they get out there and they well, you've been watching, they respond respectfully and attentively. They don't always do what you want, but even those who I wish would do some more according to the things I care about, I still have a respect for them, with a few exceptions, of course, but not many exceptions. The vast majority are good people. I believe that, and I see it. Yes, sir, Alan.
And now you see that people are beginning to say, I can't take it anymore. There was a woman at a school board who just gave them the board a peace of mind, and a coach teacher, he did the same thing, another location, and he was fired. So it takes a lot of, it takes a lot to do that.
Right. It does encourage, and that's part of what Kathy had mentioned. You have to get involved, and being involved sometimes snap. But I'm not a big favor of the town hall meetings where someone gets up and starts screaming at officials. I think that's grandstanding. I don't think that's positive for the community. And I think that's what Korach was doing. A lot of it is grandstanding, very selfish and for his ego purposes. The old saying, you point a finger at someone, there's 3 or 4 of those fingers pointing right back. I think we just need a sense of respect and respectful conversation and exploration of issues, as opposed to the yelling and the histrionics that are dominating this currently.
I was going to say that the case I mentioned, both of them were respectful, normal voice, and there was no anger. And you need that.
Yeah, that's 100%. Yes, Arnie.
I still view a lot of this, which we're not talking, as legitimizing leadership. What we're facing in this country now is that the legitimization in this country was not by the church, came specifically from the populations who were elected. That's exactly what Trump challenged by saying baloney. He got half of this country saying that's okay. I think instinctively one likes a leader like, an autocrat, only because it kind of, yes, it's bad, but the bad is better than the bad you don't know. And that's been historically always true. So I don't know. I mean, right now, our legitimization of a leader here, based on the election, that's what's being challenged.
Yeah. Well, certainly by a significant but small part of the population. I think most of the nation recognizes President Biden.
Your lips to God's ears.
Well, okay, so let's get back to our text. And so here, who would like to read a little Tanhuma? I'll go read. It's not easy reading. Now Korach took, this is the pan. What he took, instead of taking the incense pan, what Korach took, I'm sorry, it's not the incense pan. It's because it says Vayikach at the beginning of this week's Torah portion. And he took, and so the Midrash is taking on, what the heck did he take? So the author of the Midrash says, well, he took his prayer shawl and he went to get counsel from his wife. And the Holy One, blessed be he, said in Numbers 8, 6, and 7, take the Levites from among the children of Israel and purify them. Now this is what you shall do for them, to purify them. Have them pass a razor over their flesh. Moses immediately did so to Korach. So Korach began to go around Israel, and they did not recognize him because he was freshly shaven. They said to him, "Who did this to you?" He told them, "Moses." And not only that, but taking me by the hands and by my feet, he waved me and said to me, "See, you are purified." Moreover, he brought his brother Aaron, adorned him like a bride, and had him sit in the tent of meeting. The enemies of Moses immediately began to incite Israel against him. So they said, "Moses is king, his brother is high priest, and his children are deputy high priests. The priest has a priestly offering, a teruma, a gift that he can eat. The priest has a priestly offering from the tithe. The priest has 24 priestly gifts." So they're complaining about all the privileges of the priesthood. Immediately, they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron. They said to him, "You have gone too far. Rav lechem. For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in the midst of all of them. So why do you elevate yourselves over the community of the Lord?" So Rabbi Levi said, at that very time, Korach gathered his company and said to them, "You have increased," again, Rav lechem, the burden, you have increased, Rav, that same word, the burden upon us more than slavery in Egypt. All the taxes and the tithes and the responsibilities that you're giving us with all these mitzvot are even worse than the slavery and the oppression that we had in Egypt. We were better off under the Egyptians than under your authority, for in each and every year, 15,045 of us died. Now, he got that because as the yearly punishment, this is a side note, this is not from the Midrash, as a yearly punishment for the sin of the spies, amortized over 40 years, the whole generation having to pass away. So a little side note. Then he said, now they wish to stone him. So when Moses heard this, he fell on his face, and Moses said to them, I do not desire kingship, nor does Aaron desire high priesthood. Thus it is stated, and as for Aaron, what is he that you should murmur against him? So Moses said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the world, did you not command me thus, that you shall bring near unto yourself Aaron to serve me as priest? Now they have risen against us to kill us. So Moses said to them, we're going to stop right there. Now, the focus that we had in this midrash was on that term Rav. Now, Rav, from that, you get that is master. You can also get that rabbi is that. Rav lechem is what Korach said to Moses and Aaron. You have made yourself masters. You've made yourself Rav too big. You've arrogated yourself, right? So Moses then throws it right back at them. And he says, Rav lechem Korach. You are the ones who are making yourselves too big. You were supposed to be given privileges of being a Levite, and now you want the priesthood too. You're the one who's the egomaniac. So they're throwing charges against one another. And this little passage from the Talmud and Sota picks up on Moses using the same criticism, the hyperbole that he and Aaron had thrown against them by Korach. Moses then uses it against Korach, and the Talmud has a very interesting teaching. This is very important. This is what he says. The Talmud and Sota, and we'll probably get this, by the way, pretty soon at the this coming Sunday is the last of our Talmud stories until the fall. So you might get this doubleheader if you come on Sunday. The Mishnah teaches, who to us had a greater burial than Moses, as no one involved himself in his burial other than God. The Gemara teaches when Moses relates how God responded to him when denying his request to enter Eretz Israel, he says, and the Lord said to me, let it suffice for you, Rav lach, speak no more to me of this matter. So when God said to Moses, you're not going to go to the promised land, and Moses says, please let me go to the promised land. Moses said, I'm 120 years old. I've been schlepping these people through the wilderness for 40 years. Let me at least dip my toe into the promised land. And God said, Rav lach, that same charge. Rav lechem is to the plural. You are making yourself too great. Rav lach is the singular. You are making yourself, your request is too much. Rabbi Levi said, Moses proclaimed to the Jewish people when rebuking them the term Rav, and therefore was proclaimed to him with the term Rav, that he would not enter Eretz Israel, that he was seeking something that was too great for him. The Gemara explains he proclaimed with the term Rav when speaking with the congregation of Korach, you take too much upon you, Rav Lechem, you sons of Levi. And it was proclaimed to him with the term Rav as God denied his request and said, let it suffice for you, Rav Lach. So I think I'm going to stop right there for just a second. I don't know how much more time we have. We're right at almost 1 o'clock. But I think that was crucial too, because Moses does not come out as the unblemished hero here. His ego and his hubris was also called out. First of all, some of the legitimate criticism by Korach is not answered. Why in the heck is Aaron, the priest, and Moses, both brothers, in charge? And also all of these privileges. Now you can say, well, here it's all from God. Yeah, but he could have found a little bit of way of sharing some of the power and sharing the responsibility and the participation. But most importantly, as the Talmud picks up, he was charged with making himself too great. Rav Lechem, Moses. And when he threw that back at his disputants, it was noted. And that's the same term then that God used when Moses made his final request, Rav Lach. It was noted that even the greatest of leaders, and Arnie, you talked about giving into our anger. We know more and more, and we'll have this in the book of Numbers, of Moses losing his patience, of Moses giving into his anger. And when does that happen? He wasn't angry always on behalf of some vulnerable person out there. His anger all too often came in defense of his own power and position. But isn't that how it is? I get angry when my dignity is sullied. But why? Every day, 3 times a day, I ask God, let my soul, let me be humbled. Let me be more humble. 3 times a day I mention it in my prayers. Why so often? Why so often do I have to ask God to remind me to be humble? Because it's not so easy, right? We don't like to be humbled. So that's why you have to ask for it 3 times a day. You know, okay, I was a little bit too much on that one. Even Moses.
That was me. That was me. Would be 6 times a day.
So a lot in this week's Torah portion, again, Korach, Datan, and Abiram definitely are the bad apples there that Kathy wants to get out of her barrel. But the Moses also doesn't come out unscathed. Now, here's what I want to do. On a part of this is free speech. And Arnie, part of the challenge right now to our democracy is free speech. We think that democracy, many of us think that democracy is only strong when there is free speech. That's why it's the first of the amendments. And yet the great champion of free speech, the ACLU and this Sunday's New York Times, they're struggling with that because we know that there's some speech by those who are undesirable, and it has been throughout our history, that we don't necessarily want protected. We don't want the Klan or the neo-Nazis or the racists, the bigots to mouth off and say their terrible things. But then again, the ACLU said, yeah, you clamp down on them, you're next. You're next, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit on Thursday about this article. Did anyone, it also was repeated in Denver Post. Does anyone either get the Denver Post or the New York Times? If you don't get it and you want to have a copy of it, I have it on an electronic digital form. And I can email it to you. So just send me a little email and say, hey, Rick, I'd like to have a copy. I'll send it to you. We'll, of course, look at parts of it. But I think this all comes into this whole thing with Korach. Nechama Leibowitz pointed out too, it wasn't that Korach said something wrong, it's that his motivation was wrong. His agenda was selfish. So how are we to judge? Do we clamp down on free speech simply because they're threatening my power? Or do we clamp down on free speech because they're saying something ugly? And what happens when I say something that's really, that I believe in, that someone else says, no, that's not fair. That's not legitimate anymore. You can't say that. I'll give you another one. And this week, today's New York Times. Anyone get the Times? No? Okay. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Guatemala, right? Headlines on the New York Times, page 7 or 8. So that Kamala Harris was talking to the president of Guatemala to trying to stop illegal immigration. Now, that's a term that many want us not to use anymore, illegal immigration. Well, they may be here illegally, but we don't want to, we're not supposed to use those words, illegal immigration. What are we supposed to say?
Unwelcome visitors.
No,
Undocumented.
undocumented, right? Undocumented visitors, right? Well, they're not just undocumented. They swam the Rio Grande. They climbed over a fence. They eluded the authorities. That's not just undocumented. They were on the lam, right? That's sort of
They're
illegal.
swimming. It might have fallen out of their pocket.
It
but
could,
yeah.
right? There you go, right. So here, the New York Times uses it, and this is just this morning, and I said to Susan, I said, "Wow, there's going to be a letter to the editor tomorrow because that's a term we're not allowed to use." But then think about that. There's that what I just said. There's a term I'm not allowed to use, right? Now, where does that get with free speech? Where does that get with criticism? Where does that get with dispute? How can we have a conversation? How can we have two sides, three sides of an issue discussed if there are things you're not allowed to say? People that are not mentioned, he that may not be named, right? So we're going to have that on Thursday. I will bring some responsa and have some good discussion at our lunch and learn. So I hope I get to see you there. And if you want the article, just give me a little email and I'll send it off to you. But you have to email me, Alan. I'm going right to this to another meeting, and I'm to the age now that things start to slip out.
I want to say that the sad thing about the vice president going to, is it Colombia?
Guatemala.
That people already jumping on that saying, you can't stop the problem by going to Central America. It should be solved at the border, and give her a chance.
Right. Very good. And you know what? And President Biden, when he was vice president, went down there too. So they're trying all kinds of different things. But so I'm not going to talk about immigration. That's not the issue. I'm talking about speech, free speech, and even speech by those who we disagree with. And within the ACLU, which always championed free speech, in their latest board meetings and their latest documents, not so much free speech. It's becoming less of a priority for them.
One more last thing. I want to say I enjoy these classes immensely. I enjoy the facilitators and the participants. And thank you.
Thank you, Alan. All right, everybody. Thank you, Yoni.
Thank you.